Hello and welcome. My name is Matt Auryn. I am the author of Psychic Witch, a metaphysical guide to meditation, magic, and manifestation. I am here today on behalf of Patheos Pagan and Modern Witch to present an interview that I did with actress Rachel True. Rachel True is an actress best known for her role in the movie The Craft. She is a lifelong occultist and has been reading tarot cards long before being cast in the 1990s witchy cult classic. True shares her tarot knowledge in her new deck, the True Heart Intuitive Tarot, which is a box set including a tarot deck and a guidebook. Each card in the deck is uniquely made following a beautiful multicultural aesthetic and was designed and illustrated by artist Stephanie Singleton. The guidebook is filled with personal stories from True's life and experiences as an actress to illuminate the card's interpretation. This deck is great for longtime tarot readers and newbies alike. The guidebook includes information on different tarot spreads, how to read them, how to interpret them, how to center yourself before a tarot reading, and how to use your intuition to assign meaning to each card. In this interview, we discuss her new deck, as well as tarot in general, intuition, psychic ability, magic, her role on the craft, and a lot of other really interesting topics. So I hope that you enjoy this interview as much as I enjoyed chatting with Rachel. So one of the things that I think a lot of people have this kind of misconception with you and tarot happens to be this idea that perhaps you got into tarot after the craft, or that, you know, you're kind of like...
riding on the craft's coattails?
Yeah,
no,
I don't want to say that.
But... No, I understand, and I think that's why I've gone out of my way. At least especially in my memoir essays, right, which kind of explain my experience. And I just say, you know, I've always been interested in esoteric studies, and I talk about it in the book a bit. And it's not an exaggeration. I'm not making this up, that my TV broke in 1994 or 1995. I only had 3 channels. I didn't have cable, and my TV broke. And I remember being a little panicked, and then being like, no. You're supposed to not have TV right now. You're supposed to be doing something else. So I had already been a tarot practitioner, right? But that's when I probably started taking copious notes and started noticing patterns of things and putting together the correlation between cards. And when you see several majors and you get them over and over again, the same way, you know, families of cards and things like that and how they relate. So I had this notebook that I wrote everything down in. And I remember a guy came over and said, "You're really into this stuff, aren't you?" And anyway, cut to 9 months later, some friends are over and they're like, "Oh, I can fix your TV. It's just this cord." And he fixed it. And I was a little like, "Oh God, I feel weird now because I haven't had this thing." And of course I started watching it immediately because I'm American. But then the craft script landed in my lap. A friend of mine, Jordan Ladd, said, "You really should read for this movie." And that's when it landed in my lap. So I think everything is part of a whole. And my earlier interest in it as a child, you know, fed into that time period in my life. And I'm pretty sure that energetically called that script to me. Like, they didn't know I was into all this stuff. I'm just saying energetically, I feel with the work I was doing, it was preparation for that script.
Totally. And you weren't the only one who was kind of interested in the occult or spiritual things either.
No, my lovely friend Firuza Balk, I think that's where you're going with this, in the craft. She owned Pan Pipes, which was a Wiccan store on Coanga Boulevard for quite a while. I don't think she does anymore. But Firuza and I are very good friends. I think she's fabulous. I know everybody has this impression that she's Nancy. She's not Nancy. She's very much a magical person, but she's not Nancy. And she's, in fact, one of the most supportive people I know. I sent her a text about, I sent her a text the other day saying, I wish all people were as supportive of their friends as you are. So I don't know that she lets tons of people in, right? But when you're in with someone who's that real, you know you're getting the truth. So something I talk about a little bit in the book too is, I think it's so interesting that I was told by my reps, like, stay away from her. They literally said, first of all, my rep said, don't do anything these white girls are doing. You'll get fired for the same thing. Then they said, stay away from, which is not untrue back then, by the way. Their point is not to say the agents were so terrible. The agents were actually telling me what time it was. It is unfortunate that that is the time it was, by the way. But they were letting me know that the studios would probably not put up with as much what I call fuck you mommy behavior for me as they would these precious white girls. So I was told to stay away from Fairuza, and I kind of did a little bit, and Fairuza and I have talked about that. Like, isn't it interesting that inadvertently racism is the reason we didn't connect earlier?
Yeah, and you've experienced a bit of that too when it comes to like craft gigs, like conventions, and also.
Well, listen, every black actor, I am not alone in this, and I am not an exceptional case study of it either, unfortunately. I'm pretty, you know, par the course. But yeah, I mean, there were certain things that were different. We're talking about 25 years ago, and that doesn't, it's a lot and it's nothing all at once, because things are actually worse racially now than they were then in this country. But yeah, I definitely had to maneuver in a lot of ways that I think my peers have no concept of what other layers were going on for me. In fact, one of the girls in the movie sort of insinuated that like the craft was so important to me, and I was like, no, it's not. I mean, I love the movie. I'm not saying it's not important to me, but I've done many other things. Right. And what I said to her was, listen, the reason I talk about this movie and I fought to get in these conventions with y'all is because when I realized how important that role was to black people, when I thought about the fact that at the time there were no black people in these white movies. It was black movies, Boys in the Hood kind of movies, or maybe straight up horror, 80s horror movies. There might have been some intermingling, but when you think of Pretty in Pink and all those 80s movies, they were very homogenous, you know? So here was the craft coming along, and it was originally for Caucasian girls. And they let me in and let me read, and I elbowed my way in, and there was something about me that they thought, yes, you can work with this. So it is not important. That movie is not important to me so much because I was in it and I was a witch. It's like, no, it's important to me because of what it meant for in terms of black people in cinema.
Right. And I'm still even seeing that influence, like on TikTok. I've been watching videos of like younger black girls dressing up like you and saying, you know, I'm Rochelle's daughter, stuff like that. You know?
Listen, I was at a convention where there were like 5 girls coming up to me dressed like me, and it was kind of, it's very heartwarming. It's lovely to know. I mean, you do a movie, you have no idea the effect it's going to have on anyone. And that movie kind of grew and grew and grew too as the years went by. So yes, and part of why I'm willing to talk about the movie too is because back in the late 90s, I remember I was like, who cares about it? It's an old movie I did, who cares? But got off a train in the middle of nowhere, and a young black girl went, oh, you're the and she was just so excited to see me. And I thought, I get it. She doesn't see people who look like her ever in these kind of stories. So it means more than just a gig I booked, if that makes any sense. And also I'm going to keep, you know, I'll always fight about the conventions and things like this because I made it clear to that convention owner, I didn't think he was a racist at all. I just think the system itself is, we don't need any black people at these things because we don't have black people here. Now, does that make the guy who runs it racist? No, but it makes it part of the system that enables de facto racism, you know, because I had to point out to, again, my castmates, when you go to a convention, how many black people do you see? And they were like, well, I said, none. Besides, you see 2 others, maybe, besides me and one other person tops. So it's a delicate balance because at the same time, they want to make sure they have someone people like. But, you know, the fans really wanted me there with everyone. And the fact that I had to force someone to have a craft reunion to make a lot more money than we all made the whole way, is kind of you know, that's racism that I have to have a tantrum to get included in this. But the fact that it made everyone, including the convention guy, so much more money. So the fact that it's like, it's like, if you don't want to make money, then it has to be something else that we need to talk about then, if you're willing to take money off the table.
Right. Well, and it's like, I always found it so ironic because your character in that movie, like one of the major plot points is dealing with a racist bully.
Hello.
Dealing with racism and stuff.
That's actually why I was like, I'm gonna go off on this. Because I think it's one of the things I said. I was like, it's 20 years, whatever, however many years later, and I'm literally dealing with the thing that my character dealt with, and nobody but me sees the irony in it. Besides Feruza, who's the one who like hit me to what was going on, you know, I kind of had to convince the other two that like, I know you guys are whatever you are, but it's not about that. And everybody was like, no, it's not a craft reunion. I'm here for this and she's here for that. And I said, aren't you all going to be taking pictures together for the craft? It just felt weird because everyone wanted me to make sure I was defending everyone else. And I was like, everybody else, go on your own social media. I'm trying to take care of my black ass right now.
Right.
You want to be an ally, be an ally.
Right.
You know, it's fine. But I was uncomfortable with being asked to, here's a statement we'd like you to say. I'm a grown lady. I will speak for myself. Whoever it is asking me to do that at this point, you know what I mean? Because that's the beauty of, there's a lot of weird things about being a grown-up, to be honest, but there's so much beauty in it too. And I'm much more comfortable and understand what is okay and what is not okay, boundary-wise, whether it is work or personal.
Well, and you're super intuitive in general. Last October, I had the pleasure to have a reading from you. And
you guys, by the way, I keep interrupting you, but he walked in for his reading, and I looked at him and I go, you don't really need a reading. Did you remember this? I was like, you don't really need a reading. I could tell. Why are you here, basically?
Yeah. And like, it's so funny because I didn't care what the reading was going to be. Like, I was just excited to meet you. And you were like, no, we're doing a reading because you paid for a reading. And
that's my thing, by the way. It's also why I don't do, readings other than friends anymore, because a lot of people just want to talk to me. Not you. I'm not talking about you, but I'm saying general public. They want to talk to me about Rochelle, or they just want to do their Rachel True. And that's not really the point of a reading, right? It's right. To connect. So that's not what he did at all. I'm just saying it's kind of why when people are hitting me up in the DMs that I'm like, no, I was at a festival doing autograph signings for the craft and different things, and then I had booked some readings at that too, because it was wasn't it in Salem?
It was in Salem.
Yeah, I was like, I want to read cards in Salem, actually.
Right.
So,
yeah, and I am a professional tarot reader. I've kind of backed away with my book and all that, but I took a couple hours off of work to come and get a reading. And I have had hundreds of readings in my life. I have taught tons of tarot classes. So I've had practice people. I've gone to professionals, famous psychics. Your reading was one of the best readings I've had in my life.
Really?
Like,
that's really touching to hear, because like, honestly, you know from reading cards yourself, and frankly, people like you and I don't even need the cards, right? You could just read a person, but you don't know. You're saying, this is what I'm picking up. This is what I pick up. Does that mean it's always 100% right? Not necessarily, but I'm pretty good. I mean, it's something I've consciously developed, is my intuition. And part of, now that you've asked this, Matt, but part of why I don't actually go into the mystical, magical side of things, right? Because that is totally a component to all this. But there are people like you who can speak probably more knowledgeably on it, for one. But two, my theory is, listen, so many people are out of alignment with their intuition that I wanted to keep it simple, because there are so many little baby witchlings out there who think, because they have, I don't know, a new deck or desire, and desire is a lot of the huge component. I'm not knocking on them, but I was talking with Teresa, the tarot lady, about this, that there used to be a lot of reverence, when you were entering esoteric studies, whatever way you're going into it, you understood it was a craft, and that there was stuff to be learned. I do feel a little now like everybody's a witch, and, and I agree, everyone has magical stuff inside of them. But the point of my book was, hey, maybe this can help you because we eat so much crap and we, you know, whatever we're doing, watching TV or taking drugs or whatever it does that dulls our intuition. My thing is like, before you can fly your broom, you got to learn to walk. And that means just getting in touch with your intuition first, because if once you get in touch with your intuition and your higher self, then you can really tap into the psychic little zings. And you know about this. You wrote a book called Psychic Witch, you know, and I actually recommended that in an article I did today because someone asked me about that. And I said, well, you know, if you want to really develop that, here's a different book. I'd love to eventually write my own book, maybe, you know, on something like that. But I love the idea of starting with the kind of book that I would have liked to have had when I was, you know, a kid, because there was just a library then. And I love people like Mary Kay Greer because that was just, her books were important to me at that time and probably what influences my Jungian take.
I was about to say, like, she was big on the Jung. Like, I think she was the first with tarot. And I saw that kind of influence on your own tarot.
Well, and Jung used them with his patients, so it kind of makes sense that someone eventually, you know, would zap into that. But sure, her and the Spiral Dance, and you know what I mean, all the books that were out there. And I was talking with Teresa about one of the decks I used back in the day. I had Rider-Waite, but do you remember the Voyager deck? You're too young. You're such a baby, but it's a collage.
I remember the Voyager deck.
It's a collage deck. I don't use it anymore, you know, but at the time I did, because back then, like, we have a lot of diverse decks now. We didn't have that then at all. And that was a collage deck that had a lot of different ethnic symbology and skin tones. And so I was very drawn to it. It's a little more, I wonder if who created it was a bit of an air sign. I don't know, because for me, there's a little bit of a like emotional disconnect with it, if that makes any sense. And I love that deck, but it's not the deck I reach for now, but I always have one around because I, you know, I really appreciate what it was doing at the time.
Yeah, like I totally have decks that I use and decks that I just kind of collect, whether it's for nostalgia or the art or just even studying and seeing how different people interpret it.
Yeah, because I'd like to think in the end, I love my deck. I also think the book, though, can be used with many decks. You know, it's not a book that's just specific to only my deck. It's my deck is a Rider-Waite based deck. So this is going to be applicable for other Rider-Waite based decks. And I like that because, you know, so many friends show up with like I always say like a Lisa Frank deck with like a frog dancing on a log with a unicorn farting rainbows. And you can read with those, absolutely. Right. But it's so much more helpful if you understand what that card is to begin with, because then you can figure out why the unicorn is farting rainbows at that particular point in your card.
And that's why I was so excited when I found out that you were doing a deck. Not just because you're Rachel True, but because of my reading experience that I've had with you. I've known, not naming names, many deck creators who have created decks that didn't know anything about the tarot when they went together. What do you mean? So like they were more artists that just wanted to make a tarot deck.
I see.
So like a lot of that archetypal symbolic language is like gone. So not that it can't be interpreted in a different way, but that's what I love about your book, is it's so rooted in those archetypes and that tradition, but it's just sort of like giving it a new lens to see things through.
Well, I wanted to do a little honor to Pamela Coleman Smith, too, by keeping it a Rider-Waite based thing, by the way. And I'm so glad she's getting more of her due at this point in time. But yeah, I did make a conscious choice to kind of say, no, I think there's a reason why these 78, you know, Rider-Waite archetypes work, especially on ground 0 level or ground 1 through 10. You know what I mean? Once you get a little more advanced, like we were saying, Matt, I mean, again, I'm sure you could read people without your cards. You don't need, Jesus wrote a book called Psychic Witch. So that's just a tool now, I think, to make other people more comfortable.
That's what Lori Cabot says.
Oh, she does?
She's so funny to watch her read. Like, because the card.
I can't imagine, because she's been doing it forever, and she's a Wiccan, you know?
Right, and like
that's a different tradition than I come out of, but I'd actually love to get a reading. The Cabots, everybody knows if you're on this, but you know, they're sort of royalty.
Right. Yeah, I mean,
but I did want to say to you, I appreciate you reflecting that reading was good, because I think it's not any different sometimes than auditioning, right? When someone who's in the know, you can be a little intimidated, like, oh shit, I want this to be something that is, beneficial and resonates with them. And sometimes you just don't know. And all you can do is, again, get to a point where you trust your intuition that what you're saying is, appropriate for that person.
Absolutely. And I loved, because especially in Salem, like, it's so hard for me to get a tarot reading from someone who doesn't know me. So it was great to come in to someone who like had no idea who I was or what I did, and then just have such an accurate reading.
That's true, because I didn't know, right? I didn't know anything about you other than just the energy vibe, which, by the way, at the time, I remember saying to him, it just felt like up, up, up. Like, it felt like his book was going to be very successful, which it is. So that's really tremendous when we can pick up on it, because it's just energy. You can feel it. I mean, that painting, the Tonka behind me is just energy. The metal thing on the wall, it's just energy, the way that's formed. So this is tapping into this sort of unformed energy that floats around between us all.
Absolutely. Yeah. Some of the things that I appreciated about your deck. So one, I loved that at the very beginning, you're pretty much straight up, like, everyone's intuitive, everyone's psychic. It's something that we kind of lose touch with in childhood, which is like a big focus on my book. So I was like, yes, because so many people try to gatekeep that and try to make it like it's some special thing only some people have or some people can tap into. But, the work of like what you're doing with this deck and this book is being like, no, you just need to work on it. You just need to tap into it and kind of reawaken it.
Well, here's my theory to it that, like, yeah, I do stand by what I said in the book. I'm so hot, you guys. It is 3,000 degrees in LA right now. What I said in the book was true. I think everybody, listen, we are all magical, mystical creatures. What someone said to me, though, and this will make you giggle, Matt, because I was like, no, you could be psychic too. You just have to tap into it. And they said, well, Rachel, look at it this way. Like, I'm in the Pee Wee Football League and you're playing the Super Bowl. Right? Like, yes, some people have more access to that, a more refined, a more developed, a more everything. But that's not to say you can't develop your own wherever your person is at, because that person who's in the Pee Wee League, you never know, could be in the Super Bowl if they bothered to develop it. You just don't know until you try it. And as I say, too, to people who are freaky, weird, religious, who, a lot of my, unfortunately, a lot of my Black brothers and sisters are like the devil. And, I'm like, listen, that's the Tower of Babel on that card. Do you know the story of it? And they're like, what? I said, did you read the Bible? Because I have, actually, and research for my book and, just for my own edification, even though I'm not particularly religious like that. I said, but Tower of Babel, do you know what that is? Do you know what it stands for? No. Christian. Born again. No. How can you say shouldn't you know these things? Because the Tower of Babel, as you know, and probably everyone watching, was man's hubris to build a tower up to God. And God was like, no. And he smushed the tower down. And he also, and I said, do you know why it's called the Tower of Babel? And they're like, no. And I was like, really? Because it's called the Tower of Babel because God was like, now I'm going to make y'all speak different languages. So you're just babbling. So you can't communicate. So you can never build a tower to heaven again. And it's shocking to me that, like, Christians don't know these things, or that it's an angel on the card, or this and that, because my theory is, again, I'm just trying to get myself and everyone else in touch with their intuition and their higher self, which is just a clearer connection to hear God, if that's what you call it. I call it my higher self, Allah, Buddha, Yahweh, whatever your flavor is. It's just another way to clear out some of the noise. And, again, I stand by what I say on the back of the box, which is a little glib, but it's always been my truth. Like, it really is a shrink in a box, a tarot deck. Now, you can use it for divination, by the way, of course. I don't get too much into that because I just want people to learn the cards first. Before, you have to get in touch with your intuition before you can start predicting the future or divining.
And I think
you know what I'm saying?
It comes naturally once you understand that symbol
right.
Because
so, like, my
it's like
next
building
book,
a language, like the Tower of Babel, with your higher self.
Yeah, and learning the language of tarot, because tarot is a language. Like, again, in my book, I talk about seeing images when I was a small child in, like, Jung's book, Man and His Symbols. And then when I saw a deck a few years later, I went, oh, something reminds me of that. Wait, it's not like I was studying Young, by the way. I just went, that's reminding me of this. And then I looked and I went, this is a language I can learn, that I can speak. It's a I can parse this language. So to me, this book is more about teaching people how to parse the language. And then maybe if I did a second one, it would be more, you know, a little more of the zhuzh of it all. But I guess, you know, I'm just a believer, and I know it helped me to start at the beginning, and it also helped me to really understand the cards. I spent many years, not in the beginning, I'm saying back when I first started, probably a good 5 years, with not really understanding the difference between these two cards, 2 and 3 of one. Now I'm like, they're so different because I know, but I didn't really know enough to distinguish. So I'm saying, oh, if you can learn these little things, then you get so much out of it. You get so much out of your own reading. And one of the best benefits to this, I think, especially for all of us in these super trying times, right? We're in the middle of a pandemic. There's a race riot happening. You know, there's a million things going on that are super stressful. So it's easy to like call up our friends and dump all stuff all on them, you know? And I know that it's not always dumping. We're just having a conversation sometimes, but then there's other stuff where it is kind of, we're triggered and it's a dump on our friends, right? And my thing is I've used the cards to help me self-soothe and kind of look at the patterns and figure it out so that by the time I call my friend now, I've worked out a bit of it and we can have a conversation, not just a me monologuing about, I can't expect anyone to live in the minutia of my brain, and you can't expect me to live in the minutia of your brain. It's called boundaries. And I think tarot has been really helpful for me with that, because I never want to say, I don't think I have everything figured out, but I do know this is exceptionally helpful, you know? I still stumble and fall and go, okay, I'm going to make different choices next time. But tarot is helpful in showing me where I stumbled.
Right. And even just helping to like process things. So like I'm a Pisces.
Yeah, that's
so
why I said self-soothing. That's why I said
things
self-soothing.
Before I can articulate them. So sometimes tarot is that tool to just kind of articulate like, oh, you know, through that introspection and that reflection.
Yeah, and that's why I said self-soothe, though, because I think a lot of us grew up in families where maybe we weren't nurtured as much as we want, or we didn't learn. They did the best they could, right? Whatever that was. Everybody did the best, but we're still left with our stuff to grow and learn on. So you may be triggered with abandonment issues or insecurity or all these different things, and realizing that they're things you can shape and move and change. They're not set in stone, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that I think is completely brilliant about your book that I haven't seen anyone do before is the memoir aspect. The fact that you have sort of a personal relation between the card and an experience in your life is so helpful, I think, especially for...
Do you think for a newbie it's helpful? That was the point, to help them.
Absolutely. Like to give like a real world example, and one that is real, that really, you know, that you've experienced, that is related to the card. Because I remember, you know, when I was young, I just had, like, I first started with the little white book, you know?
Yeah, the little tiny booklet that came with the deck. That's why I wrote a whole book with page-long definition, or not definitions, they're interpretations.
Right. So I mean, I wish I would have had that when I started out, because I would read off these keywords and I'd be like, what the hell is it trying to tell me? You know, like...
Well, to give credit where it's due, it's very different than mine, but I know the author, Michelle T., who does tarot as well, she kind of had almost like a diary book that related to the cards a little bit. So not so much what I did, though, a memoir all through life. So I just want to give her credit, you know, because she's a big tarot person as well. But yeah, I like the idea of doing it. I didn't at the point when it hit me, oh, you could just tell stories about how you went to a Vanity Fair Oscar party and danced with so-and-so, but ain't nobody going to learn from that.
Right.
You're going to have to fillet yourself open. And some of them were kind of embarrassing, you know, but in the same token, I went, I'm not the only asshole who's asshole. Or I'm not the only idiot who went in with the best of intentions and it still went wrong. I'm not the only person who, you know, and there's stories of triumphs in there too, I think. But I do think when we're talking about the major arcana, it was like either go deep with these or don't do it is what I felt, because I feel like it's good. It's also good for people to know, because I think people I idealize actors and things like that, and I get that, but I was like, no, we're human, and there's been plenty of things. Like, people never assume that I was in foster care. They're always like, you're so middle upper, you're so bougie and spoiled, and your patois of your voice and this and that. So, I don't lead with that, by the way, but I'm just saying all of that is a part of my story. And that's why I wanted to, I think, have it in the book, because I'm glad to hear that you think it helps illuminate, the meaning of the card, because that was the point. And
Yeah.
what did you think? I have a question for you. What did you think about the fact, like, because I decided to use an unusual subject for, I think, the Hanged Man. You know what I mean? It was the essay that probably should have been the lover's essay, right? And it would have worked for both, because the lovers is about a choice, right? And I made a choice to be with someone that I probably knew weren't going to be together forever, but I knew it was a good thing, right? But I decided to use Hangman because that was the card I got back then at the time. And Hangman is one of those cards that if you don't know tarot, you're like, Hangman, it's so negative. And that's why I decided to use, instead of reversals, because I personally don't read with the reversals. Nothing wrong if someone does. That's great. I just have always gone by the energy of the card. And for me, reversals actually confused me way back when I was young, because even the reversal of a bad card would be good, and then I'm confused, and if that makes any sense. So that's why I decided to do high and low vibration, because even in a card like the Devil, it's a sexy, fabulous, good time, and it's the best sense of a bacchanalian fun, in the best sense of the word. Now, you probably don't want to do that 365 a year, but once a year, I don't know, it's a little fun, right?
Right.
So using a story about a great love of mine when I was young, for the Hanged Man, is because it showed me a different perspective on life, which is also part of the Hangman card. Obviously you know that, but seeing things from another perspective, because I had really always been, I am a Victorian lady. And so I normally don't date people unless, especially even that young, I was like, are we going to get married? And I'm not married, and it's not even that big a deal, but I was a very monogamous, relationship-oriented person. So I really had to see things from a different perspective to be able to open my heart up to this person, knowing that it wasn't going to be forever, because I knew I wasn't marrying this, but we're still super good friends. I mean, that's part of why it was an important thing, because he did open my eyes up, and I opened his eyes up to things. So,
which is like a perfect example of what I was talking about. Like, you illustrated that so beautifully. So the other thing,
my hope, by the way, to interrupt you for the 12th millionth time, because it's been a crazy day, but my hope with this book too is, like, listen, most actors get someone else to write their books. They get a ghostwriter or a co-writer, either they cop to it or they don't. But, like, I labored over this book, because you think you know how to write a sentence, people, until you write a sentence. And then, because I'm particular about how I want it to sound and read, like, it would sometimes, some sentences flew great, and a whole paragraph was in 5 minutes, and then other ones, it would take an hour just to reconstruct that sentence exactly how I wanted it, so it would flow. Do you know what I'm saying, sir, who wrote a book?
I know exactly what you're saying. Or, like, things that, like, ways that you speak is, like, grammatically incorrect. You know what I mean?
You think you can just write how you speak, and that's not always the case. How you speak, how my sentence I just said may lay as a dud on the page. So learning all that, and then, writing. I love writing. That's, again, what I've realized. It's always been one of my callings. Like, as an artist, I've always felt like I was supposed to write a book, so it kind of made sense. And I think I felt that way because of all things, and maybe you've done this to people. I think when I was 19 in New York City on Broadway, right by NYU and Broadway Avenue, somebody came up to me in a bookstore and said, you're going to be known. And I was like, sure. And they were like, no, you're going to get notoriety, but it's to bring a broader message, and you're going to write a book, and it's going to be important. So I don't know if that's necessarily this book, right? But it all kind of makes sense that all these years later, just that energetically that person had picked up on, you're probably going to be many different things with them being an artist, and that is to bring a message, whether it is through art, or through these cards, or through writing. But like I said, I like that I labored over this and wrote it myself and tried to make it so, I wanted it to sound like you were hanging out with a friend, you know, who was explaining this stuff to you, or your buddy, you know, so it was less intimidating. Because I'm not talking about Mary Kay Greer's books. When I was first coming up, a lot of books were stuffy.
Right.
Hers were not, but I'm saying, you know what I mean. A lot of them were heavy, stuffy, archaic
Same with the
tomes.
cult books. Like, you know, they were just so inaccessible because there's still that like Victorian influence.
Inaccessible is a really good word for it. And it was like you really had to, you really had to want to learn back then. It's much easier now. There's 60 million tarot sites. What I will say, and I'm sure you've said the same thing, ain't no such thing as certification, people, for a tarot. I think you can take classes with people and you can get a certificate saying I took Matt's class. That's one thing. But there is no, you know what I'm saying? There is no, unless you disagree. Because tell me if you disagree.
No, I'm friends with Teresa too. So this is like one of her hills she will die on, you know.
I get why it's important to her though, because if you take a class with Teresa or Matt, you probably get a thing saying I completed this. Now, if I go to take a reading with you, that's going to count. I'm going to go, oh, good, you studied. But it's not like there's a accredited university where you can get a degree. So because I'm just saying that because I've noticed some people charging more money than I would, and I'm a fucking known actor.
Right.
You know, insane amounts of money for a class. And I'm not saying their classes aren't good, but I think that this stuff does not have to be outpriced. And it's also why I wanted to write this book, because I'm not trying to deter anyone from going to readers, right? But I have a friend who wrote a book years ago called Psychic Junkie about people who get a little addicted. And you know, this is true, Matt. They go to reader to reader, to psychic. And my thing is, go to someone sometimes, right? Once in a while. But, you know, get Matt's book, right? Or buy my set. And for $30 or less, you can now do it yourself. Yay!
Right. Well, and that was my whole thing too, is like, you know, I want to teach people how to do it, you know, not come to me and be dependent upon me. Like, find your own power and do it yourself.
Because that's fostering a codependence. Not you, but I'm saying it can foster a codependence in the person. And it's also like my quibble with not necessarily the YouTube readers themselves, right? Because there's some really good people on there. I've seen some good, talented people. I've also seen some, you know, Vegas card sharks who are doing cards right now, telling a story. But my problem with YouTube readings in general is they're general. It's not for you. So you can look on there and you can find a reading that says, you're getting the job, you're not getting the job, they're coming back. There's a reading for everything. So you can just pick and choose. And if you were super in touch with your intuition, yes, maybe you can pick the one that's applicable. But most of the time, we're going to pick the one that says, they're coming back, I'm getting the job. You know, we're going to go with what we desire, and there's nothing wrong with that. But, you know, I don't know. I don't think I watch a YouTube video thinking I'm going to get a personal reading.
Right, and like I think that actually does a disservice to tarot in general, you know, because then people are like, oh, well, it's vague, you know, it's vague, and it, you know.
A little bit. The other thing is, and this is just personal choice, I do not think the way I read is how everyone reads. I don't. But I did notice on YouTube, everyone was pulling a 60 million qualifiers. I'm going to clarify this. And I get that. There's nothing wrong with that. It's not necessarily the way I work, but I don't have a problem with, oh, I just need a little, but I was like, you're not clarifying at this point. You're looking for the story that you want to tell in this reading on YouTube, I'm saying, right? You know what I'm saying, right?
Oh,
so that's a little, and again, not trying to disparage it. Love that it's brought tarot and those things to more people. I just, again, and say it is something that everyone can do. So, you know.
One of the things I loved about your book, too, is a lot of the decks that are coming out recently that I've noticed are either one way or the other. Either they're too sugar-coated and too, like, you know, it's like a fairy blowing a dolphin type sparkles, like everything's sugar-coated, or it's like dark and like, you know, like everything's like a dark, horrible, like.
Yeah.
But like your book and the deck itself is such a spectrum of, you know, the human experience, and that's so important with a tarot deck. Because like if you're going to paint a picture of what's going on, you need a full palette. So I love that.
So, because someone asked me, I was doing another interview and they said, so really, if you know what the cards mean, you could use it with anyone. Like he said, you could use Star Wars. And I said, yeah, you could use Star Wars, actually. If anything you can mention, Star Wars is perfect. We all know Joseph Campbell breaks down the hero's journey through Star Wars, and you can break down almost anything, you know, with that, the way Joseph Campbell does it. And Star Wars is a perfect hero's quest. And in the end, the fool through the world is simply that. So all of Star Wars is in the fool through the world, you know, with some side missions are in the minor arcana, but you know, the major goods are there. So again, like we were talking about, if you have a basis, you know, you could look at a Star Wars thing. Now, Star Wars, again, is a great archetype you could just pull from where it would actually fit right or weight, right? Like literally you've got scenes. But again, if we take more esoteric stuff, and it doesn't have to match right or weight, but it does have to tell a story. You know, it has to tell a story. It can't just be, I don't know, you know, it's like if it's just a rock on the thing, well, that's going to tell a story too, though. I mean, I guess every picture tells the story is the truth. There are some decks we're all going to resonate towards and some we're not. Like there's a huge deck out, or one of the decks, you know, in the last bunch of years that I sent or got. And honestly, I'm not going to say which one it is because people love it. But for me, I don't really use it because it feels like the person who created it was depressed when they made it, and I feel that in the deck, and that's why, like, no disrespect to them, right? But I did think, you know what, Rachel, if you were 22 and confused about the world and a little like depressed because college just ended, you'd love that deck. So that's why I'm not knocking on anyone's particular thing. I think I'm just in a space where like my day today was atrocious, but I tried at a certain point just go, it's so absurd. Like everything is so crazy that it's absurd. And I have to try to see the humor in how everything is gone to, you know? So I think I'm more positive than I was at 20, to be honest. Like I have a more positive outlook. So there is that in my deck, but then there's also some heavy cards, you know, clearly where it's heavy. And we have the gamut. There's a lot of different skin tones. I mean, if you're super white and on a farm and drove a tractor, there's a card for you there. If you are, you know, a super black person and like the World card, I just love her. You know, I just think she's fabulous, that chick. So I tried to incorporate them all without saying, oh, the swords are all Asian people, which is always the stereotype, right? So he's his mind, air, right? But I wanted to kind of just spread it out a little more and kind of break it down with the America we have, to be honest.
And I love that. And going back to Pamela Coleman-Smith, that was actually one of the things I was thinking about when I was working through your deck, that it's so great that, because she was a black woman, you know,
mixed chick, very light skin, right, but would have been dark enough, I think, the pictures I see, they would know. And she would have been treated differently a little bit.
Right. And like because it was a commissioned deck, like everyone in it is so white. You know.
Which is why I said I was drawn to that other, you know, mystical deck, because at least there was someone brown. I did not see. Actually, do you remember the Mother Peace deck? I was given that in the early 90s.
I was going to ask you what you thought about that deck.
Well, first of all, let's talk about the spread really quickly. I included it in my book because I think the Mother Peace spread is the perfect take on the Celtic cross. It's better, for me personally, it's better than a modified Celtic cross. It has a round shape, right? So there's so many different angles and things to read. They have a book, the Mother Peace workbook, that, you know, people are interested in learning about that. I'm going to give them a shout out. They got a bunch of books, but I actually don't. I love this spread. I love it so much. I don't actually use the deck anymore. I always say this because in the early 90s I did. I loved it. I loved the round shape. I loved it. It was very woman-centric, you know. The only men in there is like this one asshole who's about to kill someone. It's very women-heavy deck. So, but in the early and like mid-90s, I went, I'm not going to use this deck anymore because like I would like a date and there's no men to be found in my life. And maybe I need some men. So, you know, that's how I think sometimes is, oh, energetically, I'm not getting any dates. I have been using this very femme-centric deck. Maybe I should pull in start using a deck where there's some, and vice versa, whatever your preference is. If you're a woman, that's a, you know, that's a great deck. Or I'm sure there's men-centric decks. I'm just coming from my point of view where I was like, ain't no dick in this deck.
that's a problem for me too. So
you know what I'm saying? But I
not.
love it. I think they're super talented, and it's always, these are decks to just check out and see how they resonate. Is that too dirty for you? I can clean it up. I can clean up my language.
No, that's perfect.